7 shampoo brands you should avoid, and the ones actually safe. There is a bottle sitting in your shower right now that has already cost its manufacturer millions of dollars in lawsuits. You have probably never heard about it because the settlement happened quietly, the news cycle moved on, and the bottle is still sold on the same shelf you bought it from 3 weeks ago. Somewhere between 20 and 85,000 people filed complaints about products just like it. Not because the shampoo failed to clean their hair, because it started falling out in clumps in the shower drain, on the pillow, in the brush. This isn't a story about vanity. It's a story about an entire category of everyday products that promise softness, shine, and salon-quality results. While a handful of them have quietly built a legal history most consumers never bother to look up. Over the next 20 minutes, we're going to walk through 7 shampoo brands and product categories that have been formally accused, investigated, or sued over the exact thing they're supposed to prevent: hair loss and scalp damage. Then we're going to talk about what actually makes a shampoo safe, using the same criteria dermatologists and toxicologists use, not marketing copy on the front of a bottle. Let's start with the biggest one because it's the case that changed how the entire industry got watched. In 2014, a woman began posting videos online describing clumps of hair coming out in the shower after using a cult favorite cleansing conditioner called WEN by Chaz Dean. It had been marketed for years as a gentle, sulfate-free alternative to traditional shampoo, the kind of product beauty editors recommended for damaged hair. Within 2 years, the Food and Drug Administration had logged roughly 21,000 adverse event reports tied to that single product line. Not 21 complaints, 21,000. That number was so unusual that the FDA opened a formal investigation. One of the rare times the agency has done so for a cosmetic rather than a prescription drug, because cosmetics almost never trigger that level of federal attention. The case eventually settled for $26.25 million, one of the largest haircare settlements in U.S. history. The company never admitted wrongdoing, but a settlement that size, over a product this ordinary, tells you something the marketing never will. But that's only the beginning, because once regulators and lawyers started paying attention to WEN, they found something strange happening underneath the surface. The complaints weren't isolated to one brand, one bottle, or one company. They were showing up across an entire class of ingredient, hidden in plain sight on labels most people had already thrown away. The ingredient in question is called DMDM-hydantoin. It's a preservative, and on its own, it sounds completely harmless, almost clinical. Its entire job is to slowly release small amounts of formaldehyde over time, which stops bacteria and mold from growing inside your bottle of shampoo while it sits in a warm, humid bathroom for months. It is legal. It is still permitted by the FDA at low concentrations, the same way trace amounts of other preservatives are permitted across the food and cosmetics industry. But formaldehyde, even in the small doses released gradually with every wash, has been linked in multiple case reports to scalp irritation, contact dermatitis, and in some long-term users, follicle damage that eventually presents as thinning hair. Once you know to look for this one ingredient, you start seeing it on labels you'd never expect, tucked into the fine print behind a dozen names you can't pronounce. Suave Professional's Keratin Infusion was next in line. In 2014, Unilever settled a class action for $10.2 million after users alleged the exact same pattern. Itching, burning, hair falling out in the shower, all tied back to a keratin smoothing formula built around DMDM-hydantoin. What's striking is the timeline here. This settlement predates the WEN scandal becoming public knowledge by roughly 2 years. The industry already had a case study sitting on file. It simply didn't change the formula fast enough or widely enough for everyone downstream. What happened next surprised even the plaintiff's own attorneys, because the exact same preservative showed up again in a completely different product line, marketed to a completely different customer years later, as if the earlier lawsuit had never happened at all. Tresemme Keratin Smooth Shampoo and Conditioner became the target of multiple lawsuits, including cases filed in Pennsylvania and Illinois, alleging hair loss and scalp burns from regular, long-term use. The formula contains that same formaldehyde-releasing preservative at the center of the Suave case a decade earlier. As of the most recent court filings, this is now considered one of the more active ongoing haircare litigation cases in the country, still moving through the legal system as we speak. The company has denied wrongdoing, and the cases remain unresolved. which means nothing has been legally proven yet. But the pattern is what should concern you far more than any single verdict. Different brand name, different bottle design, different price point, same active ingredient, same complaint, filed by strangers who never spoke to each other. Then there's OGX, marketed with tropical fruit names, bright yellow packaging, and a devoted following built almost entirely through word of mouth and social media. OGX became the subject of a class action lawsuit alleging its shampoo caused significant hair loss in regular users. What makes this one genuinely notable is ownership. OGX isn't some obscure startup brand cutting corners to save money. It's owned by Johnson & Johnson, one of the largest and most trusted consumer health companies on the planet. A company whose name sits on baby products in nearly every American household. That single fact should tell you that brand reputation, company size, and decades of consumer trust are not reliable indicators of what's actually safe inside the bottle. A trusted name on the label does not guarantee a trustworthy formula underneath it. Stay with me because the next case involves more documented complaints than any other brand on this list, and it's the one still generating settlement checks in 2026, years after the story first broke. DevaCurl built its entire identity around the curly hair community, marketing itself as sulfate-free, paraben-free, and silicone-free, positioned deliberately as the gentle, health-conscious alternative to everything we've just walked through. And yet, more than 85,000 complaints flooded in through social media and the FDA before formal litigation even began, an almost unbelievable number for a niche hair care line. Dermatologists across the country began independently reporting a pattern of patients coming in with diagnosed scalp dermatitis, all tied to the same product line, which gave plaintiffs something rare and powerful in cases like this: objective medical evidence from independent doctors instead of just personal testimony posted online. The lawsuit eventually settled for $5.2 million, finalized in January of 2022, with payouts still processing years later in 2026. The irony here is hard to miss. A brand built entirely on the promise of being the safe, natural alternative became one of the most litigated shampoo lines in the entire industry. Selsun Blue, the anti-dandruff staple sitting in nearly every American bathroom cabinet, has also faced its own class action activity, with plaintiffs alleging side effects tied to its active medicinal ingredient. Dandruff shampoos occupy a strange middle ground in this story, because they're regulated more like over-the-counter drugs due to that active ingredient, selenium sulfide, which technically means the safety bar is set higher than an ordinary cosmetic shampoo. But higher regulatory scrutiny doesn't mean zero risk, especially for users applying it multiple times a week, for years, on scalp skin that's already inflamed and more absorbent than the rest of the body. And here's the seventh one, the one nobody talks about because there's no single company left to point a finger at. It's not one brand. It's an entire price tier sitting quietly on the bottom shelf of every drugstore in the country. Budget and mass-market shampoos built around sodium lauryl sulfate, the foaming agent responsible for that thick, satisfying lather everyone associates with a working shampoo, carry a lesser-known contamination risk almost nobody checks for. The manufacturing process used to create that sulfate can leave behind trace amounts of a byproduct called 1,4-dioxane, a substance the EPA classifies as a likely human carcinogen at high exposure levels. FDA testing of cosmetic products has repeatedly detected measurable levels of it in mass-market shampoos, not because manufacturers add it intentionally, but because it forms as an unlisted, unintended byproduct of a completely different, perfectly legal ingredient. It will never appear anywhere on an ingredient label because technically, by law, it isn't one. That's 7. 2 shared ingredient categories, 5 specific product lines, and 1 entire price tier hiding in plain sight. And if you've been counting the pattern instead of just the brand names, you've probably already spotted the real villain sitting quietly underneath this entire story. Here's the biggest revelation, and it's the one thing every single case on this list has in common. It was never really about the brand name printed on the front of the bottle. WEN, Suave, and Tresemme all trace back to the same handful of formaldehyde-releasing preservatives. DevaCurl and Selsun Blue prove that natural, gentle, and medicated labeling doesn't automatically mean safer. Sometimes it means the exact opposite of what the marketing promises. And the sulfate contamination issue proves that even a shampoo with a completely clean-sounding, pronounceable ingredient list can carry risk that never makes it onto the bottle at all. The common belief is that safety comes from brand reputation, price point, or marketing language like clinically tested and dermatologist approved. The evidence, repeated 7 separate times across 7 separate companies, says otherwise. Safety comes from the actual chemistry sitting inside the bottle, and almost nobody checks that before they buy. So what does an actually safe shampoo look like in practice, standing in the aisle with 30 seconds to make a decision? It starts with what's missing, not what's added to the front label in bold letters. Dermatologists generally recommend checking the ingredient list for DMDM hydantoin, along with its chemical relatives quaternium, 15, imidazolidinyl urea, and diazolidinyl urea, all of which release formaldehyde through the exact same mechanism under a different name. If a sulfate-based formula doesn't clearly state it uses a purified, independently tested version of sodium lauryl sulfate, that silence is itself worth noticing. This is where independent testing databases become genuinely useful, rather than another marketing claim to take on faith. The Environmental Working Group maintains a free public database called Skin Deep, which scores thousands of personal care products based on their full ingredient breakdown, not the front-of-bottle language a marketing team chose. Made Safe is a separate third-party certification that requires brands to prove their formulas avoid an entire published list of ingredients linked to human health concerns before they're ever allowed to use the seal. Neither organization takes payment from a brand to appear in a good light, which is exactly what makes them more reliable than a bottle that simply prints the word clean across the front. The uncomfortable truth underneath all of this is that regulation in the cosmetics industry is thinner than most people assume it is. Unlike prescription drugs, cosmetic products in the United States do not require FDA approval before they hit store shelves. A company is legally allowed to formulate a shampoo, manufacture it, and sell it to millions of people nationwide, and only face real consequences after the complaints and lawsuits pile up high enough to force a response. That's not a hidden conspiracy. It's simply how the system has always been built, which means the burden of catching a dangerous formula before it ever reaches your scalp doesn't sit with a regulator watching over your shoulder. For now, until enough public pressure eventually changes the law, it sits with you, standing in that aisle, reading a label most people have never learned how to read. If there's one takeaway to walk away with today, it's this. The next time you pick up a shampoo bottle, spend 15 seconds flipping it over before you spend $40 on it at checkout. Look for DMDM hydantoin and its formaldehyde-releasing relatives hiding in the middle of the ingredient list. If it's a sulfate-based formula, look for brands that are transparent about sourcing and independent purity testing rather than vague, feel-good language. And if you want a definitive answer instead of a guess made under fluorescent store lighting, run the product through the EWG Skin Deep database before your next purchase. Not after your hair has already started thinning in the shower drain. None of this means you need to panic and throw out every bottle in your shower today. It means you now know something most shoppers standing in that same aisle don't. That the price tag and the brand name on a shampoo have almost nothing to do with what's actually inside it. If this changed the way you'll read an ingredient label the next time you're standing in that aisle, that's the entire point of this video. Let us know in the comments which of these 7 surprised you the most. And if you want the follow-up breaking down exactly how to read a full ingredient label like a toxicologist, subscribe, because that video is already coming next.